Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to talk about the Community Planning Assistance for Wildfire program. I know some of you are already familiar with the program and may have seen me or one of my colleagues present on this, so I tried to spruce this presentation up with some new information to keep your attention throughout the webinar. Again, my name is Molly Mowery. I manage a company called Wildfire Planning International, or WPI. We partner with Headwaters Economics on the CPAW program, and together we deliver community-based services that support land use planning in the WUI. So I heard the question or the desire earlier to look at how all these programs fit together under the FAC umbrella, and we see CPAW as one of those complementary programs to support FAC. I'm a trained and certified land use planner through the American Institute of Certified Planners, and I've been engaged in WUI planning for the past 10 years. I also just want to give a quick shout out since I'm joined by another CPAW team member here today, Ben Yellen. I think he's the only one I see on the webinar, so if there's anybody else, just say hi in the chat box. Okay, so let's see here. Quick overview of what we're going to cover today is why we even need a program like CPAW, how it works on the ground, and what are some community examples that we can learn from and have been learning from so far with CPAW. I hope there's time at the end for questions, so I'll try and keep things moving forward. So why do we need better land use planning in the wildland-urban interface? In other words, why do we need a CPAW program, since that's what our focus is? What I find is that there's a very common narrative that really shares how today's wildfire problems are a result of decades of fire suppression and different forest management practices in the past that may not conform to what we now know of as better forest management practices. And while that is definitely true, I think there's a parallel story that's often been overlooked through the past centuries. So since this country was founded, the federal, state, and local government decisions have in many cases allowed and even encouraged people to build in towns and cities and homes in wildfire-prone areas without any real forethought to what happens when or if a wildfire were to occur. So we've created these built environments across the country that has resulted in many diverse, dynamic, and challenging WUI situations. Some of the current WUI trends contributing to this dynamic complexity are an increasing population, changing lifestyles, preferences for living in nature, or even finding affordable housing. It's not just people escape to nature, but there are certainly many cases where our suburbs are growing outward to be more affordable for many people. There's also, in some cases, lack of not the desire to regulate ourselves or impose private property regulations, which is a contributing factor for the differences across the different WUIs. And then, of course, there's a misconception that suppression will put out our fires. So, we get ourselves in a situation where we don't really look at other mitigation aspects of the WUI as a necessity. But I would argue that our lack of planning is starting to catch up with us. Most of us are probably familiar with these trends. More structures are burning as a result of wildfire. This slide is a little bit outdated. I've been asking the Rocky Mountain Research Station for an upcoming one since I know they're working on it. But the point of this slide is to also underscore that these losses are occurring across the country. And the other outcome we see is that suppressing these wildfires are also eating up more federal budget dollars every year. So we know that that's creating an unsustainable and unpredictable budgeting situation. And I'd be remiss, I know, again, this is a very educated audience on this webinar, but I just want to acknowledge the countless other impacts that our communities incur when we experience wildfires. So in order to support communities in addressing these complexities, specifically associated with planning in the WUI, Headwaters Economics and WPI created a program called the Community Planning Assistance for Wildfire Program, or CPAW. This is a national program. It's only a few years old. We deliver WUI planning services at no charge to communities, and this is all on a voluntary basis with the communities. This slide shows our model. We work with foresters, land use planners, researchers, economists, and scientists to work with communities to provide these services. On the community side, we engage with many different stakeholders. Primarily, though, it's fire and planning departments are our main points of contact. And our program is funded through the Forest Service and private foundations. So since 2014, we've been working with communities across the country in varying capacities to support their WUI planning efforts, as shown here. I know that a few of you, the names I recognize on this webinar today, so please feel free if you want to put your name in the chat box and share if you're part of the CPAW program, it'd be great. So how does this work exactly? I just want to kind of quickly walk through this, the basic steps of the program and give you a sense, especially if you're interested for your community, if you know other communities that may want to engage in this opportunity in the future. So communities first must apply to CPAW in order to receive assistance. This information is available on our website. This is not a picture of the home page, it's a picture of the application page. And so our annual application cycle opens in late summer. And any community that is the authority having jurisdiction can apply. So typically to date that's been counties and cities. We cannot work with HOAs. We work with them through the CPAW process, but they're not a direct recipient. Communities are competitively selected, and based on what they're looking for, we identify the level and type of need. So once selected, our typical planning process, and I say typical because this does vary a little bit from community to community, but our typical process is 1 full year. And during that year-long process, we work with a number of stakeholders to identify and discuss WUI planning challenges. We also spend a good deal of time reviewing the community's planning and fire-related codes and policies, and we make several site visits to work with stakeholders and garner interest on the ground and talk through some of these topics. With several of our communities, we also provide a risk assessment, and that's currently provided through the U.S. Forest Service. We consider a number of different planning tools throughout this process. And we either make direct recommendations on how to use them, or we make connections within the community. So, for example, we look at, how can communities better plan for their subdivisions? And we look at whether WUI risk is incorporated into the subdivision regulatory process. So, for example, is there secondary access required? Is there a vegetation management plan to ensure that hazardous fuels are removed before development occurs? Or what kind of landscaping is being required for long-term maintenance? And what kind of roads or driveways are allowed? What's the grading, the width, et cetera? And we also look at, where are homes being sited if there are topographical considerations? So these are the type of questions that we start really digging into when we look into policies and plans, to start looking at the details, because we know on a surface level these tools work well, but unless you get down into the weeds and what the actual standards say, or the policies for that matter, it's really hard to know how to change them, and that's where we come in. So at the end of this process, ultimately we come up with 3 different things. One is that we present communities with a final report of customized recommendations. And when I say there's more than one thing, it's because I believe that not only is this report useful, but this whole CPAW process is really a capacity building process. So some of our communities throughout the process, we offer trainings, we offer discussions, we offer ways for the community stakeholders in the planning and fire departments and other organizations and agencies to understand why we're doing this. And at the end of the process, some of our communities have now, quote, graduated from the first year, and so we're finding other ways to support them through ongoing implementation. I do want to be clear that CPAW is not mandatory. There's no way that we can, make anyone do anything. So what we do is we provide our recommendations that are all voluntary. And, we'll get into this in a few minutes, but a lot of what happens is communities take our recommendations so far and they said, oh, yes, we like this, or, well, we like that, but we're not going to do it right now. And, well, that's a good recommendation, but it really doesn't fit where we want to go now. So it's ultimately up to the community. It's also not an emergency management plan. There are other practitioners that are really good at doing that already, and we don't interfere with that process. It's not one size fits all. We don't copy and paste recommendations from one community to the next. While some of them may actually look similar on the surface, they aren't similar in the details. And then finally, it's not field treatment planning. We reserve that for the appropriate venues and stakeholders as well. So I wanted to give a couple examples. As I said, some of these recommendations may look similar from the outside, but I think it's really exciting as we're starting to see now some of the communities that have gone through the process or are going through the process currently and what they're working on or how they started implementing some of their recommendations. So I broke this up into 4 just general categories for us to go through, and it doesn't mean all of the recommendations fit in one of these 4, but these are some of the themes, so it's an easier way to organize it. So last year we worked with the city of Bend, Oregon, and Bend is in the county of Deschutes. And there is a Greater Bend CWPP that the city was part of. The Greater Bend CWPP includes, or it serves 8 different communities at risk. And this included the core Bend, if you will, which is the city and the downtown core. And while we found that the Greater Bend CWPP identified really good priorities and strategies for hazardous fuel reduction and improving fire protection capabilities and activities at a general level, it didn't really get into the weeds for a comprehensive set of actions for the city to have them really have that specific guidance to ensure measurable risk reduction. So, as we worked with the city stakeholders, we recommended that they look at and create a Bend-specific CWPP. And this could be as an addendum to the Greater Bend CWPP, or it could be, its own freestanding document. But we encouraged them that this was an opportunity to focus more on local risk factors and prioritize actions really unique to their city scale. This would also encourage local and ongoing stakeholder discussions at the city level because they didn't have a city, like a council, if you will, of wildfire stakeholders that regularly got together. So we saw this as really a necessary coordinating mechanism for their activities. And, this could also promote greater coordination with other land use planning activities. The city recently went through an urban growth boundary expansion that was finally successful after many, many years, the annexation process. And we saw this, one of the things that came out of that process is that they were interested in how wildfire risk should be considered in the annexation process and what new development would be required to go through any kind of mitigation in some of the areas, especially in the western part of the city. But they didn't have anything on the books to really address that. So we helped them through that process to think about it. But we also, it was one more reason to encourage a CWPP because we said, look, this ongoing planning can help you have, look out for these opportunities and really link land use planning and wildfire risk reduction planning together on a more regular basis, not just as it comes up. So of the recommendations that we made to Bend, we prioritized this one because we said this is really a starting point for you. If you're going to move forward, we think this is the right place to start. And since then, they have been beginning to have discussions on developing a CWPP. And again, I want to make this clear that this was not intended to be at odds with the regional CWPP planning in any way. We know that locally the county and the Project Wildfire efforts are fantastic. And we saw this more as an opportunity to encourage and prompt the city's momentum moving forward to play a greater role within this, regional context. So anyway, it's been encouraging to see the city move forward with one of the recommendations already. Another example that we work with communities on that often comes up is a comprehensive plan. And I picked out the city of Wenatchee for this. We also worked with them last year, and the irony with the city of Wenatchee, Washington, was we found they already had really fantastic regulations in place. But ironically, wildfire was largely absent from their primary comprehensive planning document, which is called the Wenatchee Urban Area Plan. So since 2006, when the plan was last updated, fires have occurred that have directly affected the city. So the timing now that they're going through is an update to their comprehensive plan, and the timing was really perfect for us to make our recommendations to include wildfire into the plan update. So since we made a series of recommendations on different ways they could start thinking about, which elements they could mention wildfire or how they wanted to organize their new plan and make wildfire part of that, they have created a draft update to their urban area plan that's available on their website and is out for public review and comment. And so these are just still in their draft phase, but since our recommendations have, what the city has done in terms of moving forward is incorporate wildfire. Again, this is just a draft, but the draft has wildfire incorporated into their natural environment element. So this is one element within their urban area plan. And this element now includes a brief but good background on wildfire. It also includes a new draft goal and corresponding policies. So just to give you a quick flavor of what that's about, is the draft goal has been added to acknowledge the impacts that wildfires have on the Wenatchee Valley and seek to develop and implement approaches to adapt to the risks of wildfires, making the city of Wenatchee a more fire-adapted community. And some of their policies include coordinating with regional stakeholders, review and revising the development code based on CPAW recommendations and stakeholder and public input, to consider allowing design deviations for primary WUI zones so they can have greater fire-resistant construction methods, and linking transportation to improve circulation and access for effective emergency response capabilities and public safety. So all this is to say that, what the city is really moving forward is they're, now creating ways to support future work. And we really encourage this because what we see is that communities are interested and they're taking proactive steps in wildfire, but when they have those policies in their comprehensive plan, it's a lot easier to stand in front of city council or the board of county commissioners and say, our plan, our city, our community's vision supports this, and in order to be consistent with the plan, we want to or need to move these activities forward. So that is the city of Wenatchee example. I also wanted to just go up the road from Wenatchee. We worked with the city of Chelan, which is a smaller community, also in Chelan County. And during the process, we worked with them. This is another typical recommendation, is to help communities really delineate what is their WUI and where could recommendations apply. So if they're going to pursue recommendations and they don't have any yet, they need to know, what's the applicability and what's the rationale. So in this case, we worked with them to provide a risk assessment and make recommendations for regulations. I think Patrick may have mentioned this during his presentation, that during the, he mentioned the Chelan complex in 2015 and the number of fires that the region has recently seen. And during that particular fire, the city of Chelan lost several orchard processing warehouse facilities in addition to homes. So this was a huge economic impact for a small community, and the reason why these warehouse facilities burned was because they had thousands of wooden crates stacked outside of warehouses. And so what we found in working with them is we said, well, ironically, right down the road, while we've been working with the city of Wenatchee, we saw that the city of Wenatchee had an ordinance for outdoor storage of combustible materials. So our team, in addition to a number of other recommendations, said, we would recommend you review and consider adopting a similar ordinance. We also talked with them about revising landscaping requirements to better promote wildfire safety, such as requiring the use of low flammability native plant species in lieu of some of the other predominant species that we were seeing. And so that's all to say that at this point, the city has taken these and other recommendations forward and is pursuing the adoption of a WUI code, which incorporates many of our CPAW recommendations and obviously will be tailored to the city's needs. Our final example is more on the capacity building side with the current community we're working in, which is Huerfano County, Colorado. Huerfano County is it's the second poorest county in Colorado. It's very rural. There's very limited staff. One planner also serves as the chief building official. They've been trying to fill another planning position. There's also one wildfire mitigation coordinator, which is a grant-funded position too. So, I think sometimes there's a perception that communities that pursue wildfire planning and regulations are, they certainly are on the cutting edge, but that they have the capacity to do this. And this is a common challenge we see coming up is, well, if we create this, if we create a planning regulation, how are we going to enforce it? So one of the things we've been really excited to work with Huerfano County on is exploring what that capacity looks like to move this forward, because they came to us in the application process and said, we want a WUI code. We know we have existing subdivisions that may not be, they may not be regulated through the WUI code because they already exist. But, as we start thinking further down the road, we want to look at the limitations that we have on our response and suppression capabilities, and we want a WUI code to support that, because these are very rural areas. In some cases, the response time by volunteers is an hour or longer. And as you can see from some of these pictures, you have highly flammable vegetation in remote areas that is certainly going to burn quite quickly, and especially if it takes up to an hour and there's very limited water supplies, they really see the code as something that supports their capacity in the long run. So, I wanted to just share in the words of the local wildfire mitigation coordinator, for them, CPAW is a fresh emphasis on the importance of planning for fire-adapted communities development and a framework for stimulating and guiding constructive discussions on their WUI intermix. It touches on building, land use, planning, zoning codes, and WUI hazard mitigation planning and economic development strategies, et cetera. And by that, he means that it's really bringing together as a focal point things that they've been trying to talk about with stakeholders for a while, but having this outside team come in and really gather stakeholders together to talk about some of these issues has been extremely helpful for them and really serving as a capacity building process in and of itself. So quickly, resources, I wanted to let you all know that you can go online at planningforwildfire.org, and we have all of the community profiles up there, and so you can actually click on them and look at the recommendations. They're all posted there if you really want to get into the weeds and see what some of these things say in the fine print. And then we also have a couple WUI trainings and courses coming up that may be of interest to you or anyone you know. The first one is specific through CPAW. The Western Planner, we're doing a one-day pre-conference WUI training as part of a Western Planner conference. You don't have to sign up for the whole conference. It's in Spearfish, South Dakota. You can just come. I think it's $50 for the day for the pre-conference WUI CPAW training, and that information is on our website. And then just a shout out to a couple recent FEMA courses that piloted that I worked on with a couple other colleagues, one of them also from CPAW. We developed, and it very much is a complement to the CPAW work we do. There's an introduction to WUI land use planning. There's now an intro to adopting WUI regs and an intro to WUI evacuation planning. So, if you're interested in that, it's a neat opportunity. These are all two-day courses offered through FEMA and the National Fire Academy. And I don't know when they'll next be scheduled, but again, it's a deeper dive into this topic if it's something that really appeals to you. So I tried to leave time. I think I successfully left a few minutes for questions and discussion. It looks like Marie had a question on typical team size and makeup, and I think that was applicable to this section of the webinar. So I just will respond to that quickly. Our typical team size on our end is, it varies anywhere from usually 3 to 5 of us go out to a community and have a designated team. It does vary a little bit, but it's, one representative from Headwaters Economics, really focused on the policy and research side. It would be typically myself and or another land use planner that we may use as a contractor. Ben Yellen, I mentioned, is my colleague. He's also a trained planner who comes on with our communities on the teams. And we have a forester and fire behavior analyst, Kelly Johnston, who we also work with very closely as a core team member. So we have our core team, and we then work also with the U.S. Forest Service more recently in this past year to come out and provide information to communities on the risk assessment process. It's a small team, and it's small on purpose because we also in this process really work closely with the local expertise from the fire department and planning department. So we look at this as something where we come in and can bring outside national expertise, but we really like to leverage the on-the-ground expertise as well, and so in some ways I consider that part of our team in the process. Great, I see Marie, another question, do we consider post-fire threat? We do to some extent. We really encourage that in the overall messaging of the CPAW presentations as one of the reasons why it's important. We have encouraged some communities that are a little bit more I would say in position to consider this is whether or not they have ordinances for post-fire or post-disaster redevelopment. Often, in fact, I don't think we've worked with any communities yet that really even consider it, so we think of that as a starting point to look at, in the case of a wildfire disaster, have they considered how quickly they would be able to rebuild and under what conditions? And so there's a couple neat examples out there. Larimer County, Colorado does have a post-disaster redevelopment. They have regulations in their ordinance to consider this very thing. And so I think it's a good question. It's not very well, or it's not often seen, but it's a good best practice that we do try to encourage. I guess I just wanted to also reinforce, I normally include a FAC slide with the all of the different rays of the sunrise graphic that probably many of you are familiar with. And I think it's a neat slide because it shows how plans and codes and ordinances is really one of the often overlooked rays on the sunrise graphic. But I think it also shows that this is a complement to all of the other good work that everyone else is doing in terms of mitigation and outreach. And so it's very much part of the process as opposed to a new program duplicating anyone else's efforts.
Yeah, thanks for that, Molly. That's a really important point.